Pretty Little Liars was, such a spectacular project to work on.
Yeah.
Roberto, the showrunner, he really wanted a really dark aesthetic, and
Hmm.
he protected that dark
Yeah.
aesthetic,
Yeah.
and pushed back when like the studio was like a little brighter. And I think that I came in after the pilot,
Yeah.
Joe Collins.
Episode 3, right? You were
I came
3.
in for
Yeah.
three through 10. I didn't do 9. We gave 9 to Teo Maniaci, who had been my tandem DP, who incidentally, funny story, was the first DP I ever worked for. That
Wow.
morning after graduation, I was working on an independent feature that he shot.
That's so cool.
And then, a little over 20 years later, he's coming in to be my tandem DP, and it was such a lovely full circle moment. And it was also like, it was made even better that Teo was like, I'm your tandem DP. Are you happy with this? And I'd be like,
Mm,
Teo Maniaci, you're the master. Like,
right.
I'm so happy with what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think his work was really, really spectacular as well. And I feel like, in the series, like I like, and people have commented that they don't feel the change of the cinematographer so much, which I think is like a big kudos to the three of us.
Mm,
I see some of those subtle changes. I feel like I kind of brought a little bit more light and soft light into their faces, versus what Joe did. And then I feel like, and Teo's work has always been so just, it's really beautiful.
mhm.
Like he brought even a little bit more beauty into it in
Yeah.
episode 9. Yeah.
Yeah, I knew about the Switch, and so I was watching through and I was like waiting to see, like I was like trying to see as many differences, and it really is, it feels very cohesive, and you can feel that like it's really is an amazing show because I literally went into it going like, I don't know if I'll enjoy this, it doesn't, I'm not the target audience for Pretty Little Liars, and then I was watching through, I was like, this is really good. And also for anyone who is like a younger viewer, like the watch list you could build off of that show to go back and watch everything connected to it is like immense. I mean, like when I think like episode 1, they're like talking about De Palma and all the masters of horror, and they're going through like, my favorite Argento is this. And I was like, it's such it pulls on so much, but also feels like very much its own thing. And that's the last thing I want to ask you kind of on the reference side of things is, obviously there's a lot of homage and there's some things that are direct, like clearly this is a recreation of this shot. But how do you tiptoe between homage to an original versus like just lifting the scene, trying to redo it exactly?
Well, I'll say that once we did do like, we did shoot the Psycho shower scene shot for shot, but not
Mhm.
all of that is used in the edit, and that's
Right.
part of it. I think the other part of it is, like it's more at a subliminal kind of instinctual level, feeling
Mhm.
into the references. Like one of the things when I prep for a series is, I'll fill my office with those images that we
Mm.
want to emulate, so that like I still like sometimes I know for Monsterland, I like had a vision board in my kitchen so that every day when I woke up and got my coffee, I would look, and I would subliminally, again, it's
Mm.
not like, oh, when I get there, I'm going to use a 50 millimeter lens
Yeah.
to replicate exactly the shot. But I fill my eyes with
Mhm.
those references, every single horror movie. I think that's referenced in Pretty Little Liars, I ended up watching or rewatching or going back to, and then I feel like, it's like with the intent, and the years of craft in my in my body,
Mhm.
in my abilities to kind of replicate, it does, I feel like it happens at a subconscious level. But in
Yeah.
order for it to happen at a subconscious level, you got to fill your subconscious.
Yeah. Was there anything that you watched that you were paying homage to that you had never seen before that you kind of got introduced to through that show?
I didn't watch the It movies until I worked on Pretty Little
Hmm.
Liars because I was scared.
Were they as scary as you thought they'd be?
Or they were really scary.
Was there anything you rewatched that you saw in a new light where you maybe had never
Well,
watched
I
it with.
love it was like, which It movie is it that like has the scary clown in the Hall of Mirrors?
Yeah, I think that's it too. I think that's the newest
Yeah,
most one.
and that's where like, and that's, and literally it was like from that, in episode 7 that we built the idea of that shot where you see Mouse from outside of the Hall of Mirrors banging on the,
It
you
seems like
know,
a nightmare shooting in a room full of mirrors. Like it seems like that would be a cinematographer's nightmare is like, okay, let's shoot and there's reflective surfaces everywhere. Was that incredibly difficult?
No, and there's actually like there's tricks to it, and it's funny because I actually like I find that stuff exciting, like the things that are like this is going to be a nightmare, and it's like it's technically challenging, so it becomes exciting. I answered this question in another interview about Pretty Little Liars, but like, so here's the trick to a Hall of Mirrors and what really helped that Hall of Mirrors work. One, what really helped was part of the design of those arches of that Hall of Mirrors. So it wasn't pure mirrors
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. I think it had almost like pure mirrors everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that I imagine would take quite a bit more VFX work and removal. And
Yeah.
then the second thing is that the mirrors gimbal. So for the most part, we actually found that once we planned everything out, that we could gimbal the mirrors to pretty much minimize the reflections. So we did not like, and also prior to doing a sequence like that, you ask for the VFX budget to be able to do camera removal so that you're not pulling your hair out on the
Right.
day, wasting time. But I was surprised it was a lot less, that we caught our own reflections than what I thought. Oh,
Yeah. One of the big elements of that series is that it is a largely female cast, or largely female cast, largely female crew working on the project. And I did want to talk about the female gaze and how that changes the approach toward essentially slasher material, going into it with that intent, with that mindset behind it. How did that influence the way that that was shot, the way that that project was worked on?
at a very kind of basic, straightforward level, the what translated, I think for me in the series to the female gaze was that we were shooting the girls from a lower angle, which
Hmm.
means we were making them look taller, more powerful. And that really, when you go back to a lot of like 80s slasher films, go back and check
Hmm.
it out. Most of the shots of the girls are like from that classic higher angle, and again, like kind of, the flip of the female gaze in the series is that like Tabby wants revenge for what happens to her, and she is they're not passive. They're
Yeah.
not passive, as much as uh, things are happening to them, they are all working to try to understand and take control of the situation. And I think that is reflected in the cinematography and the visuals through the very strong embrace of lower angles. And by lower angles, I mean like we did like slider without a base on the ground, no boxes underneath it was a very common camera setup for
Yeah.
us,
And
looking
and
at the ceilings, we're looking up at people.
right.
Um,
And you were shooting on like 10 millimeter I mean, you were shooting really wide in a lot of those like a lot of those shots are super, super wide, full. You can see everything in the room.
yes, yes.
That's interesting. I notice it now. Like now I'm thinking through it and like that makes sense. But I've never even noticed. Obviously, the bad guy in all these movies is always huge and lurking, but I've never even noticed the angle perspective like that.
Oh,
That's now I have to go back and rewatch
go
everything. That's
back
okay.
and
It gives
check
me
it out. I mean, Malia, who plays Mouse, is, pray a little shorter than me. I'm 5'3", but all of our girls, again, and it is, and those angles are also very reminiscent of like art house horror. But
yeah.
I will say that from the male gaze, usually when you go back to those early slasher films, a lot of the girls, a lot of the victims are shot from a higher angle. It's
Mm,
that like, it's like a leftover belief that a woman looks better from a higher angle, which I don't. isn't necessarily true,
Yeah.
and like our young actresses actually look good from whatever angle you shoot them from. It's kind
Right.
of, you'd have to do a lot of work not to make them look good.
Right. You'd have to be intentional, go out of your way to set it up. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm glad I asked that because I was
You know,
curious what the approach was.
and then I was going to say the wide angle lens. And I feel like I kind of I started opening that can of worms up in episode 3. And that was, our widest lens was a 17 millimeter lens, but we were shooting at 5K, which means we were cropping into the sensor. So everything's a little bit tighter. And I started using that 17 millimeter lens at 8K. And a lot of the time, throughout the series, we were jumping out to that super wide 8K 17 millimeter. And I actually got that from Monsterland, and I got that from
Mm,
Logan Kibbins, who I worked with on Monsterland. I remember us having a conversation prepping our episode, and she was like, like wide lenses. And I was like, horror and like thrillers and wide
mm,
lenses, like, does that really work? And she was like, yeah, it totally works. And so
mhm,
we incorporated, we got this lens called it's from Airy. It's an 8 millimeter rectilinear lens. So it's 8 millimeters, but it
mhm.
doesn't bend anything. And it pretty much, if you put it in a room, it sees like, you know, close to 270 degrees of that room. Like if you're standing a little close to the matte box, you're going to be in
Yeah.
the shot, but it doesn't bend any lines. So it has this like, to me, it's something unnatural. It's a way of viewing a space that's unnatural, but because it's not fisheye and
Mhm.
bending, you can't quite put your finger on it, like
Yeah.
what it is. And that's what I think it is with lenses sometimes, when we want to create disquieting moments, it's like, then it's leaning into what is unnatural,
Yeah.
but not necessarily like making it so loud that you're distracted by it. You're
Mhm.
just, again, you feel it at a really instinctual level
Yeah.
that like something's off. And then on Monsterland, that 8 millimeter lens became kind of like the signifier of like the evil thing's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So I brought that to Pretty Little Liars,
Yeah.
and I love those big epic
Oh, yeah. I
big
love
epic
that.
fights.
Like anytime I see those kind of shots in anything, like whether it's like The Shining, Evil Dead uses those a lot, I mean, X just this year used that quite a bit, where it'd be, the shots in the shower where it's like you feel like you're 1,000 feet in the air looking down, like I love that kind of look, and seeing that again through this, like even the shots of like the movie theater on the outside in Pretty Little Liars, where it's like this really gorgeous, you can see every element instead of just a close up of the marquee. Really, really cool. So I definitely want to ask about that.
But
But
yeah,
oh, sorry,
I am going to say one more thing really quickly. You can edit it out. That yeah,
go ahead.
the wide angle approach was very much part of the visual language of Pretty
Yeah.
Little Liars. Even our close-ups and our coverage, we tried to stay on wider lenses, and part of that was also, to give us that sense of, it gives you that sense of urgency, like you're there with the person. You're
Mhm.
not watching their story, because literally, when you're on a close-up on a 35 millimeter lens, 32 millimeter lens, the camera has to be right there, within 2.5 feet of the actor,
Yeah. Yeah.
which translates, I feel like, visually again differently. And it's not something that you're like, oh, I see. They are making me feel like I am there with them, because they're like, again, it
Yeah.
all like, it's very subliminal.
Right, right. Yeah, that's something again talking with my wife about the series, because she kept mentioning, she's like I get, because she kept rolling her eyes and look at me because there'd be references to stuff, and she's like, this sounds like you, like it sounds like you wrote this, because like there's so many conversations where I'm always like talking about all these different topics, and she uh she looked over at me and she's like, do you think people she was saying, do you think people, she was talking about younger viewers, like, do you think they get the same impact out of it? And I was like, I think it's definitely enriched, but I think so much of it is just the reason it worked in the 70s in this movie, it still works today. Like it is so much subliminal. Like Carrie works not just because it's Carrie, it's like those shots work. They're effective. Like there's a reason it worked the first time and it still continues to work now. And I love all those little subliminal moments. And then I love being able to sit back once you know what those inspirations are and going like, okay, this is what they're doing. Like this is how they're creating this experience for me.